This is a series of videos that we're using to teach medical students about the physical examination. When you first get into medical school, you have to learn how to take a history from somebody, so how to get the person to tell you their story, and then also how to do a physical exam. We think it's really important for medical students to learn about what's different about doing this in older adults. We call it geriatrics. I hope that you'll enjoy these videos as well. In geriatrics, we usually ask for a family member or someone who knows the older adult very well to come to the appointments. But what's the best way to get information from these so-called collateral sources? So I'm going to give you 3 main tips for how to take a history from a collateral source. And collateral source is the family member or friend, partner, the person who's accompanying the older adult. Now in geriatrics, the main reason that we ask for an accompanying person is because there's a higher risk that there will be cognitive impairment on the part of the older adult. It's very valuable in that case to get another person's impression of what's happening with the day-to-day function of the older person. And that's not just true in cognitive impairment. Other conditions like depression could affect a person's perception of things, and it can be helpful to get another source of history. But there are some do's and don'ts about how to get this collateral history, and I'm going to share them. Tip number 1 is don't just talk to the accompanying source. This can be tempting, especially if you think the person, the older adult, has some cognitive impairment or has a different perception of what's going on, which is different than the reality as others see it. But it's really important to talk to the older adult and to make sure that they feel heard and respected. It's often ideal to interview the older adult separately from their accompanying person, but that's not always possible given the time constraints and space constraints of a geriatrics visit. So make sure that you're respectful and talk to the older adult as well as the person who's with them. The number 2 tip for talking to the accompanying person is to kind of go in with an open mind and those classic open-ended questions. Remember, in geriatrics, we're often treating the family and not just the older adult themselves. So it's important to keep things open-ended and get the family member's perception of how things are going, rather than kind of making assumptions or leading them into a certain point of view. I usually try to keep an open mind, even if I have mounds of information from other sources. Because when we're developing a plan to go forward, it's really important to know the accompanying person's perception of what the issues are. It'll really help you to focus. So you might think that diabetes control is the most important thing, but for the older adult and their partner, it might be getting the person to actually eat more or exercise. It's important to kind of listen in to both of the people who are there in the office and then make a patient-driven plan. That's the ideal anyway. And number 3, sometimes there are things you just can't say to the collateral person in front of the older adult. Don't forget that people are in our office in geriatrics for a couple of hours, which is a long time. But then the person who's accompanying the older adult is going to go out for lunch with them or go home with them, and they're going to have to face a lot of questions. There may be repercussions if difficult things are talked about in the visit. For that reason, it's important to read those nonverbal cues and to propose to the accompanying person that maybe they might want to put it in writing. They might want to give you a letter, which could be handwritten, could be faxed, could be emailed, depending on what the policy is in the office. Or they could sometimes schedule a separate appointment to talk about some of the things that they can't talk about with the older adult. It's very important to respect those relationships, even though it means getting the story might take longer. Other tips include not letting the family member help when memory testing is going on. It may be better if they leave the room for that part of the assessment. Sometimes we rely on family members to be interpreters, though. So it's really important to kind of be sensitive to whether they're just interpreting or adding some other hints or embellishments. Also pay attention to nonverbal cues. If you notice head turning, so for example, if the person who is the older adult that you're assessing is always looking at their spouse or family member to kind of check, even when answering very basic questions, that might indicate that there is an underlying memory problem. For more information about aging, go to www.thewrinkle.ca.